Hello everybody, welcome back to the Marketing Freaks podcast. Today we're going to be talking about all things data privacy, so considerations from an advertiser's perspective and also from the users. So a pretty big conversation. Also, we're going to be giving away a copy of this book, Ponderings of a PPC Professional by Kirk Williams. In fact, a signed copy of this book. So if you want to be in with the chance of getting that, come and subscribe on Apple Podcasts, leave a review, and then we'll be picking a winner in the next couple of weeks and announcing on our Instagram stories. So definitely do that, and hope you enjoy this episode. All right, Dan and Abby, so data privacy.
The big thing at the moment. I don't think it's ever going to go away this year.
That sticky subject. I think as advertisers, it's a genuine rock and a hard place.
Yeah.
So you kind of, totally get everyone needs to have their privacy. Data privacy is super important. That has to happen. But on the flip side, it makes it harder. Like the less data you have, it's harder to kind of grow a business. It's harder to advertise. I think ultimately it's the smaller advertisers that are going to suffer the most. So it's a big conversation. It's a big conversation, and it's happening. And there's all sorts of different rollouts over the past few years, and this year, of course, with iOS14. So going to try and chat through the whole situation really, and kind of how we're seeing it as people who actively run advertising.
Cool.
So,
a lot to dive into.
Yeah, a lot. First thoughts, like good or bad. What's your kind of overall opinion?
So we were talking about it yesterday, weren't we? I think it's interesting because there's kind of like a lot of people have got quite upset about their privacy lately, but it's something that's been being tracked for a very, very long time. I think people have just become more aware of it. I think that's what's happening. There's been an awareness of what people are doing with their data, especially larger corporations. But actually, if you've ever had a Nectar card, if you've ever signed up to a loyalty program, you're giving out data there. But I think it's just the fact that people are becoming more aware of what people are doing with their data now that they're tightening up their thoughts about it maybe.
Yeah, I think it's a difficult one because I think for me, I see the benefits as a marketer of the tracking. So like, for example, with the iOS14, using that as an example, if I opted out, I'd still be receiving ads. It's not like you wouldn't receive them at all, but they're just going to be a lot less relevant. And like for me as a marketer, I don't want to be getting my feed clogged up with any more random stuff than it already does. So I'm like, I can see it from the other point of view, like Abby just mentioned, like people want to know how their data's being used and things, but I think it's how it's portrayed at the moment as well. So there's been a lot of stuff around, Cambridge Analytica. There's the great hack on Netflix, which everyone's watched, and it scared a lot of people because they weren't aware of how things were tracked. And I think that was an eye-opener for a lot of people. But I think in the long term, I'd still like to have the control, but because that's the thing with iOS, you can have the control of what you opt in and opt out of, and I think I'd still want to see personalised information for me as opposed to guesswork. Like TV advertising is quite a good example of that. So I can see the benefits of it. I just think, everyone's got Alexas, everyone's got Fitbits. They track data. You're opting in for that data to be tracked.
Yeah.
But you're getting like a gain out of it, like a reward, like whether it's being part of a community. Like Abby mentioned, Nectar points. You're getting stuff back as a reward for sharing that data. So it's like I think that's the difference with it's like Facebook ads, Twitter ads. Yes, you're getting like personalized ads, but you're not gaining anything from it unless it's something you want to buy. I think that's the difference here.
Apart from access to the platforms, which are free to use, and I guess it's the trade-off, isn't it? That's the cost of being on those platforms is your data. It's
your data, exactly. And I think Facebook have got they're testing at the moment like with iOS. There's a prompt where you have to opt in or opt out, which is quite a loaded prompt. It says allow or opt out of tracking, which to me just shows you that you'd want to opt out because there's more information about what they're doing with it. But Facebook are putting a prompt before to encourage you why you should and they're talking about personalising your ads, but one of the parts of it is to keep Facebook free. So they're trying to make it explicitly clear that if everybody opted out, they might have to start charging you for use of the platform. Whether they'd actually do that is another thing. But yeah,
it feels a little bit ultimatum-y, doesn't it, though?
Yeah.
Like, let us use your data or we're going to charge you. I feel like that might get people's backs up.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I think
definitely.
it's definitely an interesting one. I don't think everyone will have different opinions on it, but I think we live in a world where is anyone really private? If you're posting on all your life on Instagram, it's all there for everyone to see. But I'll opt out of tracking on Instagram, but I'll publish my whole life on it. It's kind of like how private do you want to get? Is
definitely.
Is that?
And also, I think Facebook is the platform everyone thinks of when they think of data privacy, because their last 2 years have been horrendous from a PR point of view, haven't they? So I think everyone thinks of Facebook and Facebook at the worst, and Facebook get all my data, and why should they have all my data? But actually, to your point earlier, Abby, Pinterest, Google, you know, everything that you're using has some degree of your data. Your Tesco's loyalty card, you know. It's just, I think Facebook are very much at the forefront of the conversation because, arguably, of their own doing, they've had a lot of press on the subject.
Yeah, exactly.
So on the subject of Facebook, iOS14, big rollout. I think that was announced as a big change towards the end of last year, kicked into this year, and everyone is now having to deal with it, you know, who's advertising on the platform. So brief summary, what's it all about, and what do advertisers need to think about with it?
So I think I'll take the first stab at this, Abby, jump in if you have any thoughts on it. But so obviously Facebook are making the most noise about this, so everyone just assumes it's a Facebook issue, but it affects everyone. Every app on an iOS device will be asked to opt in or out of tracking. But if you think about it from a paid social perspective, quite a lot of changes on Facebook. So the attribution windows have changed. So their default used to be 28-day click, 1-day view, because of how information will be shared after this and how much information can be passed back. That's being shortened to 7-day click and 1-day view at the moment. But when the prompt launches, it will be 7-day click. I think this was something Facebook were going to do anyway, because like I think people know about how third-party cookies are being depreciated soon, and there's a lot less information stored for a long amount of time in cookies now. Like Safari have been blocking more than I think a couple of days for a while. So there's that change. People have had to verify their domains, and for it's quite a lot of hoops for especially small businesses that don't either have big teams that know about this or agencies they work with. There's a lot of technical know-how, I think, which is a lot of businesses won't know about or have made the change. So you need to verify your domain as the first step, and then basically, essentially, because the users that will opt out, you now have to have a prioritization of your events. So before you could have had a myriad of events like purchases, add to cart, sign-ups, like really custom things like scroll depth, which you could have been optimizing for and everything. Whereas now you have this 8 limit, which could affect especially a lot of businesses with larger stakeholders and things. This obviously has an impact on people's campaigns because they've got to be more specific in what they're optimizing for. So there's that side of things. And then finally, the people that have opted out, you only get, at the moment, we thought it'd be 7 days worth of data on one event. So say, for example, an e-commerce client, the customer who opts in would do an ad, view of content, add to cart, add the payment info, initiate the checkout and purchase. If you'd opted in, you see all of that information in Facebook quite nicely. If the user's opted out, you can only see the highest priority of that list of 8 you'd recommended. So normally you'd want that to be purchase as your highest priority. So you'd only see that. So you're missing part of that funnel. But what we've now learned is you can only get that information sent back within 1 day of them clicking, which is going to be a huge gap in reporting. It's still going to happen in the back end. People aren't going to lose sales, but we're going to have a much less clear view of what's working, especially if a lot of people opt out. So that's a big change, I think.
Yeah, I guess the risk to actual sales performance is, like a lack in relevancy.
Yeah.
Which
exactly
who knows exactly how much difference that's going to make. But there's an enormous change in terms of the data that we can see to help us optimize, and the data that we can see to kind of optimize within the platform.
Mm-hmm. And I think me and Abby were talking about this yesterday, and what everyone's recommending is, if the data's delayed being sent back, we can't optimize as granularly every day. We're going to have to wait 3 days. Like, it can take up to 3 days for some things to come back. We may have to look back a week later in that attribution window and be like, oh, what we thought wasn't working is working. It's just the delay on reporting what we see is going to change everyone's mindset on how they approach that. And I think it's how you deal with that internally if you're an in-house team or a client, an agency working with clients, like to manage that expectation. Like, you're not going to have the instant insights as we once had, which is a difficult thing for people to accept, I think.
Massively so. I think there's all these bigger implications, but then there are practical implications for people running ads on exactly what you said. Like, you have to wait a little bit longer to see the data. You have to take a slightly different view and a different mindset as to what's happening. So there is more than ever, like a real need for that expertise. Otherwise, you're going to be in a bit of a pickle, aren't you?
Yeah.
Oh yeah. I think it's really complex for people that aren't just e-commerce as well. Like, if you've got a bunch of different things that you're wanting to track, and you've been setting up individual tracking for each time you say you're in event management and you're trying to push for different events, if you set up different tracking for each of those events, that's no longer going to be, you're no longer be able to do that. You're going to have to change how you do your tracking on your website. Like, there's so many changes for people. And I think, like, for Dan, like what Dan said, I think it's the smaller businesses that are going to suffer, and like the less understanding of it. Yeah. Because everything's going to have an implication. Like, if you have a certain event as your top priority event and that changes, it takes 3 days once you make another change for that to then come into effect. Like, it's all just slowing it down and meaning that things are going to be moving a lot slower.
Yeah. And it's all information that's not... we were talking about this the other day internally, weren't we? Like, I don't think Facebook have... Because they've jumped on this quite quickly and they're learning as they go as well. They've had to put processes in place, so that's completely understandable. But I don't think there's a clear documentation of what's changing very well, like how that changes, how it impacts a business, like what's a high priority risk, what's low priority. Whereas Snapchat have shared a couple of slides which are color coordinated. This is your high risk, low risk. Here's what's changing. This is what it means for you. This is what's being removed. It's really clear, especially if you just wanted to share it with people that might not know.
Yeah.
And I feel with Facebook, the information feels like it's everywhere, and it's actually people that are working in the platform, like us, like media buyers, that are sharing that information, whereas it should be coming from themselves. So that's another thing, is all the platforms have different viewpoints on this, how this is going to roll out. There's no one size fits all, and who's got it right is going to be very interesting in the next couple of months.
I don't think no one has the real answer at the moment, do they?
No.
Well, it's being challenged as well. So in France, there was a court case, I think, which got thrown out yesterday, where
blocking the roads.
They were saying this is against it's impacting competition there, and then they're kind of like making Apple have more of a slice of the pie, and that got thrown out. But it's interesting. There's a whole other thing in China that's going on at the moment, how they're trying to work around this, and I think the rollout may get delayed because of it. Because Apple make their phones in China, right? So they can't annoy them, they can't piss them off. But at the same time, if they give them special dispensation on not being able to track more, people in the Western side of the world are going to be like, hey, they can't do it. So they're in a bit of a rock and a hard place with it at the moment. It's not...
So many implications.
I'm all for privacy. I just don't think it's... I don't think it's being done for the right reasons. But I think it's good for people to know what's being tracked and how the data's being shared. I think those views are really interesting. I saw a post yesterday. Is it DuckDuckGo, the private browser, which doesn't share any of your information? They put a tweet out which showed how much actual stuff Chrome browser tracks from you, and it
is terrifying.
It's terrifying, but I think that transparency is really good from Apple, how they're showing that. But it's up to each person, I think, to choose their what they're happy
I
with.
definitely think so. I think the transparency side of it is good. I think it's good. I think there needs to be transparency on the bigger impact of it, and that you know, you're going to see less relevant ads. It's going to be harder for businesses to grow, and not that every user is actually like, they're not really necessarily going to care about that. But I think a lot of the press around privacy is negative.
Yeah.
Or like, not privacy, the press around use of personal data is understandably quite negative, but there are positive sides to being able to use it, I think. But it's a big one. And I think it's stepping away from Facebook and social for a bit. There's just this broader trend, you know, with ITP2 and Safari, like you mentioned, and you know, years ago you could see California thing.
GDPR.
GDPR. You know, you used to be able to see organic keywords in Google Analytics. I remember when that went, it was like, oh my god, like this is what, you know,
end of the world.
Yeah, exactly. And so it's going to keep going, and the regulations will keep getting tougher. So where does that put advertisers and businesses? Because I think it will eventually get to the point where you'll be able to see overall marketing spend, overall traffic, overall revenue. Like, for
me, I think these are conversations that you should have now, because like you said, things are going to get more depreciated, I think, and less information is going to be available. And I think it's kind of looking at, especially for a business like a growing business, like we work with a lot of e-commerce brands that are kind of growing, so we can, and you work with Shopify and things like that. And I think it's just working out what's your total marketing spend, and then what's your revenue at the end of it, and kind of setting a overall like blended ROAS in those channels. Which, if you can't see, like, okay, if we're investing 50k and we're getting X amount back, as long as our ROAS is 5, for example, we're happy to spend. And it's like, you just will have to kind of accept, like back in the day where this wasn't as sophisticated, that there's going to be things attribution wise missing. And I think attribution's never been perfect anyway.
True.
No.
You know, the questions we always get is, why does Google Analytics look different to the platform? And it's kind of like, this approach just generally is beneficial now, just to understand if you want to grow. It doesn't matter. So I think it's going to be interesting. I think this year and next year, I think there's going to be quite a few changes. Like we said earlier, Google are getting rid of the third-party cookies, which, you know, how does that impact the display network? How does that impact all sorts of things on that side? And they're not replacing that. So are you going to now have less relevant information for targeting? So it's kind of thinking outside the box in terms of how you reach people as well, not just the reporting side of things. Like, how can I find people that are most relevant to me? Because that's the other part of this we haven't discussed yet, is if you're removing tracking, that all these pixels work off like people's knowing who buys these things or is viewing these things, to build like lookalike audiences or to retarget people on whether it's Facebook, the display network, on websites when you're seeing banners and things. And if that information is missing, the gaps start forming. So the lookalikes, for example, aren't as effective because there's not as much information there. So do you have to change approach and not rely on that strategy as much anymore? So there's loads of things that this impacts, like big picture strategy, I think. And I think it will unfold as we go through the year. I don't think anyone has to. If anyone tells you they've got all the answers, or they've got a miraculous system, which I've seen ads for, that will still give you this reporting, don't trust anything they say. It's bollocks. Like, we're all in the same boat. You can't get around it. So, yeah. But I think don't fight it as well. Like, it's going to happen. You need to adapt and be agile. Don't go, we're going to lose the attribution windows. So what? Is revenue still if you're losing the 28-day attribution window on Facebook, if the revenue's still the same in your back end, nothing's happened. Like, it's not a big problem. It's just your own platform that might look different. You just find the new normal.
Definitely.
Oh, I hate that phrase.
Yeah, so do I.
Don't say the new normal.
So that's ingrained from this last year. They put it into our psyche without us realising.
Yeah.
This is an unprecedented change.
Oh
Yeah,
no.
exactly. Oh,
Yeah,
no.
let's move on. But I think that's a really good bit of advice, is to start having conversations along the lines of, if we had none of this, we had those most basic of metrics, spend and revenue,
Yeah.
what would we do? And then
Yeah.
start working back from there. And
Mhm.
I think there will always be a degree of insight we can get to understand what elements of campaigns are working well, and
Yeah.
how
Yeah.
which ones we should spend more money on and which ones we should pull out and all that type of stuff. It's just I think you're absolutely spot on in that it's almost as much of a mindset change and a change to your approach
Yeah.
as it is a big technical change.
Yeah.
I
So
think.
it's a nice challenge for everyone. And I think you'll find the people that are good at this will thrive, and the ones that have been bluffing it for a while will struggle
Absolutely.
now
Yeah.
as well.
It'll sort the wheat from the chaff. These things always
Exactly.
do.
Yeah. You'll quickly find out if the person you've been relying on information from is knowledgeable or has been winging
Yep.
it for
Yeah.
a while. So
Definitely. So, given that no one has the answers, what do you think our answers are? Like, what's what's the advice? I know there's kind of these micro steps in terms of what you need to do if you're advertising on
Yeah.
Facebook to get your events prioritized and verify
Yeah.
your domain, and there's all of that. There's the bigger piece conversations around what do we do in the future when even more data gets removed.
Yeah.
But what's your advice for the next, say, 12 months?
I reckon it's like don't get too scared by all this. Like, don't pull back from the advertising that you're doing just because we're losing out on some data. Like, it's still a very powerful tool. You're still being able to access people, on their phones when they're out and about, when they're at home. Like, it's still, in my mind, one of the most powerful forms of advertising we have access to. And just
Yeah.
because we're losing data doesn't take away from that. I think exactly like what Dan said. If you're getting the revenue in that you're hoping for and you're hitting your ROAS goals overall, don't worry about it too much. Like, there'll be ways around optimization and stuff like that, but yeah, don't get scared. It's still powerful. It's still working.
Yep.
I think two things from me is kind of lends to Abby's point, but also now's the time to try and diversify your mix if you can. So if you're just focusing on Facebook ads, trying Pinterest, Snapchat, like wherever fits your business. Obviously, I think it's worth it, because it might be that you might see a small dip somewhere, but you might gain that back somewhere else. So it's kind of like you still need to try these things. And I think the second thing is you still can get the historical data out of Facebook and the platforms. So pull that out while you can. So you can kind of look at like, okay, on average, if on the old attribution we were using, we were getting this many purchases and this much revenue, and on the new one we're now getting this, and work out the percentage difference. So if you're losing 20, if you're going to get 20% less revenue, and if you're on a ROAS of 2.5 on the 7-day click, within that 28-day period it would have gone up to 3.3 or something, and you can kind of be like, okay, I'm happy with it now, and that's your new normal. So it's just finding out those new benchmarks. I said it again, I'm sorry. I'm very sorry about that, and we can bleep those out as swear words. But yeah, so it's kind of like just working out what's your sort of focus on new targets, and that's what you work off. If you have to, and I think it's making sure you have, especially as an agency, having that open dialogue about all of this change is key.
Yeah.
Don't keep clients in the dark. We've been really transparent with it all and how that will change, and we've had some really positive conversations around, if we need to reassess targets and things like that. But actually, the platform's doing okay for us at the moment. So
yeah, that's
the change hasn't
a
been
really
too drastic.
We haven't seen anything fall off a cliff
No.
yet.
And I think until that prompt launches, we also won't know for I can't imagine it will roll out in every market and every territory at the same time.
No.
I just can't see them doing that. So it will slowly roll out. We won't get the big pic, and they'll never share the data of who's opted out. But I wonder if Facebook are using that prompt before to get an understanding for us who's clicked
Yeah.
they're going to accept and who's not, so they can give us a benchmark.
Because they
If
are
it's
testing
5%,
it. Yeah, they are
Yeah.
testing it in certain markets at the moment, aren't
Yeah.
they?
Yeah.
And I think if it's 5% of people opting out, it's nothing. But my advice would be, try and diversify and and you should be doing that anyway before this. And then just identifying what your like delayed attribution would be based on the new window. So like, and being like, that's happy, I'm accepted of that.
I mean, I think when on the adoption rates, when GDPR kicked off, everyone thought, the world's going to end.
Yeah. And
I think actually most people, when they go to a website, will just, and
accept,
just get out of the way, So, and that was, I think that was an unexpected behaviour.
Yeah.
From it. So we just, like you say, you don't know until you know, do you? And not panicking now. Like, there's no need to panic yet.
No.
And there should be no need to panic in the future because the opportunity still exists. It's just the view on it may be slightly different.
Yeah. The big thing will be retargeting will become smaller. The pools of those people will become smaller. And that's going to be the same on any platform, on anything and you just have to accept that. But it's how do you get around that? You can still target people that interact on the platform. So if they've engaged with a Facebook post or Instagram post, those you can still retarget those people because they're actions that are not off Facebook, for example. Same if you were doing it with the other channels. So there's still ways around those sort of things. But that comes back to the mindset we were saying in the strategy and how that might change.
We've been talking about as well, right? Like if the retargeting audiences are going to get smaller, then build up your email lists, do some lead gen, build up those kind of lists that you have control of. Take some control back of your retargeting.
Yeah,
exactly.
That's another good bit of advice as well, isn't it? It's kind of again just thinking of those other strategies that will get you to exactly the same point, i.e., a really nice, warm, qualified audience.
Yeah.
Just a different method.
Yeah. Exactly.
Yeah.
It's just and these things will be figured out as we go. We'll have a good idea of what we want to do, but until this change actually rolls out, we're not gonna.
Yeah.
And the thing to remember, everyone's in the same boat, so everyone's going through the same thing. It's not like it's negatively impacting like one business more than another. Just who
definitely
can work that out, I think.
And hire an agency that knows what they're talking about.
Exactly. But I think it's one of those things. So when we get asked about, can you help us with our Google Analytics and set up like that, there might be some of these things now where people might have questions around this, especially the smaller business. And we're not saying we're the best qualified because everyone's learning at the same time, but we've got quite a good understanding now of how that process works. So
we are here to help. Sales at overdrivedigital.co.uk.
Yeah.
But no, genuinely, if there are questions around this, because it is genuinely confusing, get in touch, let us know, and we're happy to help. And we'll be keeping the blog updated with anything, that updates on iOS 14 or anything else that's relevant. So obviously give that a follow, and we'll just try and kind of guide people as best we can with the information that we have.
Yeah. And I think this is a topic, I know we spoke about iOS 14 a lot because that's the big privacy thing at the moment.
Sure,
but privacy, digital marketing and privacy are two things that there's going to be new things coming out all the time.
Oh, yeah.
And you've just got to be adaptable and, having with, like you said, with GDPR, everyone's still fine. I don't think anyone's worse off because of it.
Yep.
So we will wait and see. But obviously, the other thing to remember is this only impacts Apple iOS 14 users. So anyone on a lower iOS doesn't impact them. Anyone on Android doesn't impact them. Anyone on desktop doesn't impact them. So the one last thing actually I haven't mentioned yet is have a look at your Google Analytics. How many users do you actually get from iOS? And think worst case scenario, if they were all on the new software, that's how much you might lose on people opting out.
Yep.
And is that the end of the world based on the amount of revenue you receive and things like that? So I think there's plenty of the market still available to reach.
No, absolutely. All great advice. Thanks guys for joining the episode and kind of having the chat, because it's such a big topic.
Definitely.
And we'll see how the year plays out in terms of iOS 14, and like we say, we'll try and keep everyone as updated as we possibly can. If you enjoyed this episode and found it useful, please come and subscribe, and we will see you on the next one.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks.
Bye.
Bye bye.